Hi, hello, and welcome to another video by Fermuve and Jerry's take on China. This is another episode of the Wu Mao Show. So I would like to first welcome all our audiences and Jerry to the show. Jerry, how are you tonight?
Very well, thank you, Fernando. It's been a few weeks since we had a Wu Mao show. We've had a lot going on in the background for all of us, but
Indeed.
it's good to be back.
All right. As you know, we are going to be talking about a Joe Rogan Experience video that was broadcasted a day ago, 2 days ago, and when I watched it, it had already almost 2.8 million views. So the messages that were shared there by this particular person that we're going to talk about is what we want to debunk. Okay, so why don't we start with the beginning of this video, talking about
Mm.
who this person is. So, Jerry, what do we know about this person?
Well, until today, I didn't know very much about him at all. Peter Zeihan or Zeihan. He's
Mhm.
a geopolitical commentator and analyst, and the way I view him is an extreme nationalist. He pretty much everything that he claims that is bad about the world is bad because America has allowed it to be bad. Everything that is good about the world is only good because of America making it good. So, do you want me to go through a couple of the things that he's said in the past at this
Sure, why don't we
stage?
do that? And then we
Okay.
have then we address a particular video. But
Well,
yeah,
he says
share with us.
one of his first comments is global supply chains are only possible with the protection of the US Navy. In other words, only the US Navy is protecting the supply chains. Well, the Horn of Africa is probably the only place in the world that actually had a serious problem with supply chains needing protection. And even the US admits, and it was in their Stars and Stripes magazine a few years ago, that if it hadn't have been for the Chinese coming in to the Horn of Africa, where they have their only global expansion under the United Nations auspices and working with the United States, Japan, and France, the Djibouti Horn of Africa is the only place where the US haven't protected properly. So Japan, France, and China are helping them to protect supply chains. That's the only place in the world that I can think of where US has helped any form of protection for the supply chains. The next one he says was the American dollar underpins international energy and financial markets, which is completely the opposite. The financial markets create the American dollar, which are then underpinned by the oil. It's not the US underpins the oil, it's the oil underpins the US. Take away the oil from the dollar, and this is one of their biggest problems, is going to collapse. So pretty much what he says is the opposite of what the world really sees. And this is the kind of guy that he is. This is one I do agree with. Complex, innovative industries were created to satisfy American consumers. Well, Americans didn't want to do their own dishwashing. They didn't want to do their own clothes washing. They didn't want to. I mean, pretty much it's true. American innovation gave us things like the mobile phone. It actually didn't, because that was Swedish or Finnish, or I think it was Nokia,
Ericsson, yeah, I
Ericsson,
think.
those kind of companies. But America certainly did expand the innovation chain. There's no question about that. But then they offshored everything, so they have no manufacturing of any of that stuff. This is the kind of guy who says it's only America that created this, and that's the person that we're talking about.
All right. So without further ado, let us just play some of the things that we want to discuss. So we're going to start and take you through this video, yeah, bit by bit.
Mhm.
And
I have to
wait,
say, I watched this video twice, and each time I watched it, all I could do was say, "That's wrong. That's wrong.
yeah, it's
That's
it's
wrong."
from the
Yeah,
very first seconds, it's very, very difficult to watch for a person who knows and understands China. So uh,
yeah.
this is where he starts talking about the issue of this video, that China has only 10 years left. Let's watch for a second.
Mhm.
First place. And that's all going down right now,
So when you're saying that China has 10 years to go,
at most.
what do you mean by that?
Well, we now know that they've lied about their population statistics, and they overcounted their population by over 100 million people, all of whom would have been born since the one-child policy was adopted.
Okay, so as we can see here, he's basically talking about the one-child policy. This is what caused a lot of the problems. Now, I'm going to play another bit where Joe Rogan actually asked him, "Hey, what is it with Mao and the one-child policy? What is it that you have to say that is
Can I
causing
just comment
this
on the
problem?"
comment that he made where he says China has lied? There is
Hmm.
one academic in the United States who is of Chinese ethnicity who says China may have lied in order for some municipalities and regions and areas to get more money for their educational development, stuff like that. They need to have more children being born, so they lie about the number of children. But there's no actual evidence to support that. So China lied about, and maybe 100 million people less than it really is actually not a correct statement. It's an assertion by one American-based academic, not
Mm.
the school of thought of the rest of the world, and certainly doesn't marry up to China's census numbers. But carry on.
When
Sorry.
when we said that we were going to discuss what this person is saying, I think that you said it when we were preparing that this one bit of
This is
information
the
should
one.
discredit anything else that we're going
This
to
is
discuss.
actually
But
about
not
1 minute, 1 minute into the video, and it does totally discredit the man. Let's put it on
yet.
there.
So let's play it on.
Those places where
Wait, so it's a one. Here we go. He's asked about, well, Mao and the one-child policy. Listen what he says.
they're
Now,
20s.
what was the logic behind the one child? Was it that they were overpopulating?
Mao was concerned that as the country was modernizing, the birth rate wasn't dropping fast enough, and that the young generation was literally going to eat the country alive.
All right, so this is what
Every
this
single
is what he
person who
said.
knows anything about China is just look.
Hmm.
No, what? Mao? Mao tried to
Why
grow
is
the
it ridiculous,
population.
this theory?
Mao spent his time trying to grow the population. He wanted to grow a future army. He wanted to grow a mechanized population that was able to run the factories of the world in the future. He had all this in mind. And the last thing he wanted was less children. He encouraged everybody to have more children. So this is why you have in the 1970s, 1980s, and this is why there is an aging population issue. He's right about that much. In the 1970s, up until the 1980s, we were in China seeing families of 10 and more children. The one-child policy was not Mao's policy. Every single
More
person
people,
who
more
just
power.
knows this much about China knows that the one-child policy started in 1979. And if you know this much about China, you'll know that that's 3 years after Mao died. It's just, there you go. The guy's knowledge
Sorry,
on
Peter.
China is just gone out of the window. Apparently, he has a postgraduate degree in Asian studies, but I don't know what part of Asia he was studying. He did that in Otago University in New Zealand, but what he was studying was certainly not Chinese history.
Everyone you ask about Mao and his premises were more people, more power, more people,
Yeah,
more power. So,
yeah.
and well, the fact that the one-child policy started after Mao died is just, I mean, so
Not
that's
just
one
after. It
single.
wasn't like Mao's legacy. I want to put this in, and they put it in after he died. It was completely turning around from what Mao wanted, and it was 3 years later. It was Deng Xiaoping's policy, I think.
So, guys, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. We have discredited Peter.
We
No,
could
let's
stop
continue
there and
because
just say, "Go watch this show," because you'll just do what I was. Oh my God, no, no! Did he say that?
all right.
Let's keep going.
No, there's another bit where he talks about well, what the real problem is. So that's at 240. Let me bring it back in. Let me skip here. So this is 244. Listen to this.
And so, what are the other problems that they're encountering that leads you to believe that they only have 10 years left?
Well, without young people, we've seen their labor costs increase by a factor of 14 since the year 2000. So Mexican labor is now 1/3 the cost of Chinese labor.
Okay, so labor cost has increased 14 times since the year 2000, and now Mexican labor is 1/3 of what China's labor is. What's your take? And then I'll give you my take, Jerry.
Okay. I'm not sure what Mexican labor is, but if it is 1/3 of the cost of China, that's exploitation. So it's not something that we really want to be going, a track we really want to be going down. There is no doubt that China's labor costs have increased. China's labor security has increased. Now, what he's doing here is contradicting the Western narrative that Chinese people all work in sweatshops for nothing. He's contradicting that narrative. Chinese labor costs have increased because their labor conditions have very, very much improved. So I don't think we can really take this one with anything other than just a very large grain of salt. Chinese labor costs have increased, correct. The reason they've increased is because China now has a very highly skilled. I think we're going to come to that point in a little while, but I've got another statistic for later on. China has increased its costs, but it's also increased its artificial intelligence, it's increased its mechanisms, it's increased, just the Xinjiang farming. Yeah, the Xinjiang farming, for example, is completely mechanized now. Like 85% of all the cotton in China comes from one region, and 85% of that is harvested by John Deere and other types of machinery. So, this is, labor costs have increased for sure, but why are American businesses still investing in China? Because not just the costs have increased, but the efficiencies have increased tenfold as well. So your mechanism, your automation, your intelligence levels of not just the machines, but the people.
Focus is different.
Yes.
No, and also when people think about China's GDP, China's GDP is slowing down. It might be true, but you also have to understand that the kind of GDP that China has today is not the same that it had in the year 2000. In the year 2000, it was focused and based on a couple of pillars that were cheap labor and, well, certain logistical advantages. But China no longer needs cheap labor. This is why a lot of factories are moving out of China to places where cheap labor is available, because China is now manufacturing high tech and high level equipment and high level technological devices. And so this type of industry is no longer required in the country. So what you're producing high tech, you need high level and high skilled employees that are going to cost you more, of course. Now, is this all across the board in the country? No, but you can see a shift in that direction that had lasted for the last 10 decades. 10 years for the last decade. And it is visible also in the way the environment has changed. The quality of the air, the quality of the water has improved because a lot of these labor-intensive industries have moved out of China, and that has helped nature take a breath and recover, basically. So this idea of labor getting expensive, there's a reason for that, and the reason is actually quite positive. All right.
As labor gets more expensive, so the efficiencies improve. And as the efficiencies improve, the cost of manufacturing a part stays roughly the same. The labor is more expensive, but the part doesn't cost any more.
This is one that, we're going to go on and list because Jordan Peterson posted something like that. What has China's contributed to the world of technology? Listen to what this man says. Let me put it on.
System focuses on memorization over skills. So despite $1 trillion of investment in a bottomless supply of intellectual property theft, they really haven't advanced technologically in the last 15 years.
All right, let me remove this man
because stole a space station,
Yeah, so they haven't advanced technologically in the last 15 years. So China has its own space station, the Tiangong, I think is the name, and they built it because NASA did not allow them to participate in the International Space Station. So they said, okay, we're going to go our own way. We're going to build our own. And yes, other countries are invited to join to do research later on. But this is something that has been developed by China itself, plain and simple. Mars exploration, uh, a navigation
How
system
about,
that
I
is.
was just about to say navigation and
Let's list some of
communication
them.
systems. Yeah.
There you
Well,
go,
there's
which
a
is
couple of obvious ones. The navigation systems, the communication system, Huawei's 5G. We've got Wi-Fi and 5G everywhere in the country. It's, going back to Australia is like entering a third world sometimes. Even your 4G doesn't work in parts of Australia.
mhm.
I don't know about the rest of the world, but I'm just speaking about where I've visited recently, or relatively recently. Pretty much everything that China has done, it's done on its own merits. It's got the highest number of scientific papers published in the last 3 years, I think, and increasing. The gap between China and America is increasing. It overtook America. It's either 2017 or 2019. I can't remember exactly, but it did overtake America in the terms of the number of publications for science and technology. It's also recently, and I think it was 2021, overtook, and in 2022 extended the lead on the number of patents issued. And now we've got Huawei patents having to be paid for by American companies. So, to say that this has
As
been a
an innovator.
long-running story. This intellectual property theft has been a long-running story, and it's just a lie. It's not even a misunderstanding. It's a lie.
Let's explain it.
China
Let's
said,
take a minute to
well,
explain it.
yeah, okay. Well, China
Um,
said a few years ago, when people wanted to come here and do business, if you want to do business, you share your technology with us. If you don't want to share your technology, don't come to China and don't do business here. That was something they said way back many years ago. People said, well, we want to do business with China because it's the world's largest market. So we agree. And they signed agreements to say we will share technology. Yes, that was China saying, if you want to be in our market, you have to pay the price. So that has then been turned into the words intellectual property theft. That's not theft, that's an agreement. When Ford Motor Cars wanted to start producing cars, they had to share. When Volkswagen wanted to start producing cars, they had to share. Now it's the other way around. It's China is sharing technology with the rest. China was sharing hypersonic missile, but not hypersonic missile, hypersonic engine technology with Australia a few years ago. But it wasn't about missiles, it was about transportation. China was working on hypersonics for years because it wanted to have planes that would go from one country to another. Imagine catching a flight from Guangzhou to London in 3 hours. That's what they were working on. Whilst America says, oh, they're stealing hypersonic technology so they could build missiles. Well, now in a defensive move, they've put that hypersonic technology into missiles. This is not intellectual property theft. This is intellectual property expansion. It's something that the Americans or the Brits or the Germans were working on is now much, much improved because China innovated from that. That's not the same as intellectual property theft. They shared the ideas, and China has improved on those ideas. Which country invented the 360-degree camera? Which country has the best drone cameras in the world? It's all done here. This is innovative technology that is growing in China at the same time as people like this guy are saying, well, they stole all the technology. Whatever they stole, they're now so far in front that argument is dead in the water. It must be. How can you steal something when you're already in front? And did not America just get caught stealing hypersonic technology from Northwest University in Xi'an? That was just only 6 months ago. Who's stealing the technology?
I mean, to hear this person, Peter, to say that China hasn't innovated in the last 15 years, there's no technological advancement. Just think about an app like WeChat, an app that actually Elon Musk says like,
why don't we have a WeChat here?
Yes. Why don't we have a WeChat in the West? So, so sorry to say, but this person is talking nonsense. But let's continue because now the nonsense goes boom.
How can it get worse? Surprise me, Fernando.
Check it out. All right, we go to thief 36. Listen, this is hold on to your seats.
Putin lied to his face, for example, last February about the war, saying, why would I invade Ukraine? And you can see in some of the presses, the defense guys in the back of the room, like, they didn't want to say anything because she has a history of shooting people he doesn't like.
I'm hanging onto the seat. I've got it.
Sorry. Let me just play it again.
They didn't want to say anything because she has a history of shooting people he doesn't like.
I'd love to know the name of any single person that Xi Jinping has ever shot. No, he didn't say.
I mean, how can you go and say something like that to an audience the size of Joe Rogan's? I mean, it's in the.
He didn't say that she has people shot. He says she shoots people.
Yeah, like
that's a hell of an allegation to be making. It just made it up. Did it just come out of his hat or somewhere else?
I don't really understand how these people.
There's obviously no support for that. Unless he knows someone.
All right.
I mean, who got
the other thing is, he's saying that Putin lied to Xi. I mean, who is the strongest strategic partner for China today? Russia. They have the BRICS. They have so many cooperations. They're doing military practices as we speak. But yeah, Xi had no idea what was going to take place. That's probably the narrative, but just really think about it.
It actually may be true, but it has no bearing on China's coming collapse, unless he's saying, well, this is a guy who shoots people at random, and everybody's afraid to talk to him, but he has no power. Okay.
Yeah.
All
right.
This is your cat in the box, isn't it? He's either dead or he's not dead. We go
into point number 5, guys. We have 12 points, so stay with us.
Yeah,
this next one is at 406. 406. So let's move forward a little bit. This one is interesting, and this one is close to our hearts because it's about sanctions. Listen.
So we now have tech barricades that prevent the Chinese from buying the equipment, the tools, or the software that's necessary to make semiconductors. In fact, he went so far as to say any Americans working in the sector have to either quit or give up their American citizenship.
So
Biden said that, not Xi. Not Xi. That was Biden said that.
Yeah. So basically, China doesn't have the ability to buy equipment, tools, of software to make semiconductors. What did we read just a few days ago about Huawei?
Huawei has just done it down to 3 nanometers. What's in nano? I don't know what the M is. Nanometers. Okay, down to 3 nanometers.
They are doing 7 nanometers already, and they have patented the process to manufacture 3 nanometers. And it's also important to understand the particular application of these semiconductors. Most used ones are higher than 7 nanometers, are 10, 14. Those are the most popular ones, and those are the ones that China makes without a blink. It doesn't have an issue making them. Now, the smaller ones have very specific applications, and well, they will lead to technological breakthroughs in the future. So the smaller semiconductors you can actually manufacture, well, the more ahead you're going to be in the future. But just a few days ago, Huawei announced that they have patented this technology.
That does not mean that they can produce them in commercial quantities. And this is something where he's not right, but he's not entirely wrong. What he says is China has no access to semiconductors, and it has no access to the machinery to make them. Well, that's wrong. But clearly they do. They have access to the machinery to make all the semiconductors that they need to continue with cars, mobile phones, washing machines, coffee makers, all the things that they're making. No trouble whatsoever. The artificial intelligence and the high level of quantum physics and stuff like that, that will take a couple of years, and it definitely has set China back. He calls it a barricade. I would call it an impediment. And it's certainly, it is a difficulty for China to overcome, because commercial quantities of those things are going to be a couple of years away, and that's a fact. So in that
But
respect,
there's also
right.
news.
Yep.
There's also news about certain countries in the northern part of Europe who have decided not to follow the U.S. and say like,
I
well,
think you're talking about
you
Holland
cannot.
there, and
Yeah,
Holland have decided that they will follow the U.S.
yeah, they'll
sanctions
do
now.
business. They have decided
No,
now.
they've changed
Okay,
their mind. So obviously, something maybe they're going to remove the Invasion of the Hague Act or something like that.
but like
There's
anything else,
something has happened to cause Holland to say, okay, we're going to make it difficult for China now too. Yeah, that's
but
a
like
more
anything
recent
else,
thing.
whenever there is a sanction, whenever there's an impediment, as you call it very appropriately, China turns around and does its own thing. Think about the
Mm,
space station, as we just mentioned
mm,
it. Think about Huawei.
yes,
Basically, you cannot use Android anymore. What did Huawei do in a couple of months? Come
they
up
just
with its
created a new operating
own
system for themselves.
operating
Yeah,
system that is now
mm,
the third most popular operating system in the world. And it's
yeah.
flawless. I mean, I've had my Huawei for years. I switched to it and absolutely, it's just amazing how, okay, switch it on, change to the next one, flawless, no issues, just like that. So,
Mhm.
yes, these impediments are only going to motivate scientists and researchers and well, people in
Mm.
engineering and technological areas to work harder. That's
Yeah.
what they do. So
The the
he
the
might be right.
Huawei the Huawei sanctions did hurt Huawei for a few months, and it has held them back. It stopped their growth. It didn't stop their growth. It didn't cause them to shrink. It slowed their growth, and that's another
Mhm.
factor that people keep forgetting. When they say China's in a slump, it means it grew by only 3%, not 5%. They don't have to reinvent words for China. I used this comment in a video the other day. They've reinvented some words. So, that, for example, losses are now called negative growth in America. China doesn't
Mm.
have negative growth; it has growth. That's one. Another one was vehicle residency. That's for people who
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have an apartment or a house. They have a
Welcome to
car.
my vehicle residence,
You
Jerry.
have yes. There's a definition for people like you. You're living in your van. Yeah, it's a little more comfortable than some people's car, I think.
Indeed.
Yeah,
All right, let's
for
continue
sure.
with this next one. This next one is well, we started to touch a little bit on the contradictions of most of these experts. So let's play it. It's on 434. So let me bring it back in. 434. Listen to this, and you tell me what so many experts say.
They are the most vulnerable country in the world right now.
So
Well,
China is going to take over. China is the biggest threat in the world, but at the same time, they are the most vulnerable country in the world. How
this is
does
a
that
classic
fit?
Gordon Chang, isn't it? This is a classic,
Exactly.
and this is Schrodinger's China, the cat in the box. It is the world's most vulnerable, the world's most dangerous, the world's most threatening, and the world's most impending collapse. I don't know which it is. I tell you, it doesn't
So
look like it's going to collapse when I look out the window.
you should see the stuff that, anyway, that's for another video. But
Yeah,
man, this
dark
park
now.
is full of RVs, and there's one that's around half a million US dollars parked right next to me. An overlander that's just phenomenal. But anyway, let's continue here. The next thing is he's touching on Taiwan. Yeah. So what's gonna happen if China decides to take control of its province, Taiwan? So let's listen to what he says, and then we are going to just dissect it a little bit. That is on 525. So let me play it. All right, listen up.
Other than, well, here would be a big problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taiwan. Like if we impose the kind of sanctions that we've imposed on Russia, if China decides to invade Taiwan and the world stands up and the world imposes sanctions on China, how does that go?
Very ugly for the Chinese. So
Okay, so that's the first thing that I want people to hear. If the U.S. places sanctions on China, how would it go for the Chinese? Very, very ugly.
Can I ask another
We
question?
being told, sure, please.
If the US imposes the same sort of sanctions on China as they've imposed on Russia, what's going to happen in the US? Because
The
more
economy of the
than
U.S.
no, the US. The US has something like 400 million privately owned firearms, okay, guns.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're not made in China, no issues about that. Parts for guns are not made in China. That's all an American issue. But it also has the world's largest population of substance abusers and prescription drug users. And all of the drugs that they use, more than 90%, actually, I think it's about 90%, 87% of the drugs that America uses come from China. 400 million guns, the largest population of gun owners who are also substance abusers can't get their substances. I challenge America to put that sanction onto China. They'll say, we're sanctioning everything except medicines. They'd have to. And then China will just say, well, if you want sanctions, you've got to have sanctions. We're not sending you any medicines. Sure. They'd be over in a week. Because what would happen the moment that China says, we're not sending you any medicines, any pharmaceuticals, the moment that happens is that all of the hospitals, all the pharmacies, all the rich people will hoard it for themselves so that they can meter it out to the people who can afford it, because it's a capitalist society, it's a free market. They will then say, but people who living in the trailer parks of Alabama and they've got 30 guns but they don't have a decent house will then start to say, I want my medicines. That's what's going to happen.
We see this on a daily, at least on my Twitter feed, all the looting and all the robberies that take place in broad daylight with cameras in front of people, and that's with goods that they don't necessarily need. Like they go into a Gucci shop and they start stealing bags and shoes. But when you're talking about medicine, when you're talking about food, medication, things that are necessary for the sustenance of people, nothing's going to stop people from getting those.
The one thing America will have is food. It's got plenty of food, and it's got neighbors on both sides, Canada and Mexico, that have an ample supply of food. But what they won't be able to have is the infrastructure to spread that food around. Distribution would fall apart because their vehicles would be needing parts that come from China. Tires, wheels, engines, gearboxes, they all come from China. So that's going to be a big issue for them.
Now, when he talks about these sanctions, this next part that we're going to listen to is difficult to listen to, because sanctions are a form of war. So let's listen to what he says here.
You put the sanctions that are on the Russians on Beijing, and you get a deindustrialization collapse and a famine that kills 500 million people in under a year.
So
500 million people are going to die, he says.
So many things to say. Number one, where does he get these numbers from? Where does he get these estimates from? But that's not the point. For me, the point is, the main issue is sanctions kill people. Sanctions hurt countries. So when you think about these sanctions that have been imposed on Xinjiang manufacturing, for example, they are hurting people. They are hurting businesses. They are hurting the people that they're claiming to try to protect. And that's all they want. Now, but let's get back to the original idea. He's saying, like, if China decides to do a military operation on Taiwan, it's going to be very bad for Taiwan. It's going to be very bad for China.
Mhm.
And he's going to say something very interesting right now. He's going to say, and the Chinese know it. Why would they do it if they know that is bad for them? Why would China do a military operation on Taiwan if they know it would be bad for them? Just listen to Xi Jinping again and again and again. All he ever says is peaceful reunification, peaceful reunification. He says it again and again and again. He has no interest in doing a military operation unless it is to defend and protect the province of Taiwan. That's
he's made
it
it very clear that he will not attack his own province, but he will defend it, and he will defend it from people who try to take it away from China. That's a very, very simple case. We're not going to attack Taiwan. How can we possibly invade our own province? For one thing, they don't feel it. No Chinese person even thinks of this as any sort of invasion. They think of this as protecting their property. If some outside influence, outside force wants to try and take Taiwan away from China, that's not going to happen. That is when this will change. And that's what he's talking about. And of course, they say that's aggressive behavior. I would argue that, and I would argue that anywhere with anybody. If you say to me, I'm going to take away the property that you have, I've got a one-bedroom house, and they say, I'm going to take away your kitchen. No, you're not. You're not taking away my kitchen. That's mine. It belongs to my apartment. No, we're going to take it away. Now, I would fight that. I would fight for that property because it's mine. And that's exactly what China is doing. And if we use that analogy, imagine coming into somebody's house and saying, we're going to take this property. It belongs to us now, without any authority, without any agreement. That it's not going to happen. And if you're talking about democracy, you can't take away Taiwan without asking the people of China, because you already agree it's part of China. You don't agree necessarily about its political status, but you do agree that Taiwan is part of China. So if it's part of China, you have to ask the Chinese. 1.5 billion people say, no, that's ours. And 25,000 people might say, but they wouldn't say we want independence. They say we want the status quo. I think it's a fairly safe bet that China is not going to invade anyway, so it's probably a moot argument.
There's a couple of things that I want to show about what Taiwan means for China, and this part is at 6:16. So let me drag it to 6:16, and we will listen to this. And this is related to what we were talking about on the semiconductors.
Even if the Chinese were able to capture Taiwan without firing a shot, it doesn't solve anything for them. They're still food importers. They're still dependent on the United States. They're still energy importers. And even if they take every single one of those semiconductor fab facilities intact, they don't know how to operate them because they can't operate their own.
So now China cannot operate the equipment necessary to make semiconductors. We just stated that Huawei just patented the technology to make semiconductors that are borderline and breakthroughs in semiconductor technology. So this person is talking out of his hat, as you said earlier. There's also again to reinforce a little bit what we're saying. If all the consequence of China launching a military operation into Taiwan are negative, why would they do it?
Why would they do it?
There's no reason to do it. So that's what Xi Jinping has always said, is for reunification.
And I think it's a fairly safe bet that America are not bluffing with this. America are not going to go to war over this. That's a fairly safe bet too. America will encourage others to go to war on their behalf in the same way that they've done in Ukraine. It's just what they do now. They don't want another embarrassing Vietnam, another embarrassing Afghanistan. They don't want another embarrassing Iraq. They haven't won a war in a long time. And in fact, they haven't won a war, I don't think, except their own civil war. They did well there. I think it's a simple case of they're not bluffing. They are going to cause Australia, Japan, maybe South Korea, and they would like the Philippines and Vietnam involved in this. But of course, the Philippines and Vietnam are both quite China-friendly governments now, so I don't think that's going to happen. It's just a simple case of it's just talk, and he doesn't know what he's talking about when he's saying these things. And as for they couldn't operate these factories anyway, well, almost everyone who works in the semiconductor industry in China is, believe it or not, Chinese. So I think they probably know what they're doing.
All right, let's continue with another
Not a
part, which
surprise,
is
is it?
quite interesting here. Let me go to 717. This one is just, I mean, this video, as we said, right? You start watching it, and every second is one line that you're like,
Yeah,
what is
no,
he
that's not
talking
right.
about?
That's not right. Yeah, that's what I was.
All
I
right,
was like,
listen to this part. He's talking here about Xi Jinping being isolated, and nobody's giving
yeah,
him information. Nobody dares to talk to him because they're scared. And how does he know that? Listen.
him. But Xi is so isolated himself. He doesn't want to hear anything except for what he wants to hear. And since no one knows what the status of the conversation with the voices in his head in on any given day, no one wants to bring him anything unless they're ordered to.
How do we know this about him?
Because there's no one to listen to anymore. That's one of the fun things about Russia versus China right now, is that the Russian information security is so poor that American intelligence is literally listening in on everything. But in China, we can hear into the office, but there are no conversations happening.
Okay, so
I think he's just admitting a deficit in the United States intelligence gathering information. There, he's saying what the CIA have actually said. They don't have boots on the ground in China. They don't know what's going on in China. They can't anticipate what's going on in China because in the old days, in the corrupt old days, they probably would have had many people employed by the CIA and NEDs and those kind of offshoots working inside of China and collecting money. Now, what Xi Jinping has done is he's purged the government of the corrupt. Basically, there's no corruption. I'm not saying that you won't find a corrupt official in China anyway. I'm saying that its systemic corruption is gone now. And so people have to justify. You know, a lot of people I know who work for the government drive 10-year-old cars because they're afraid of getting questioned if they buy a new one. Why have you got a new car? And they have to explain that. There are checks and balances in there now, so people can't. You know, the ideologists don't really exist in China. China is a communist country with Chinese characteristics, socialist with Chinese characteristics. I prefer to call it a Chinese a Chinese country with other characteristics, some capitalism, some socialism. But the fact is that they don't have the spies that they used to have. And they can't, because they're all using Huawei phones, I guess, they can't backdoor into the phone system. No one's using an Apple. No one in the, this is an interesting point. Chinese high-level government, high-level military, they're not allowed to have Teslas because Teslas can gather information and send it back to Tesla. But they're not stopping Teslas from being sold. They're just saying if you own one, you can't bring it to work. If you're a general in the army,
but don't bring it to work.
Well, your wife can drive it around. I mean, that sort of thing is okay. I mean, and this is a fact because Teslas gather information, and it's the same reason why they don't allow DJI on their military bases because DJI gathers information and caches it back to DJI. So that is a fact. These things do happen, but they haven't got intelligence gathering apparatus. And they haven't got intelligence assets inside of China. So what he's saying there, no one talks to him, or at least what he really means is, we don't know what they're saying to him.
Exactly.
How he knows
this is what I wanted to say. He says, we know that nobody talks to Xi Jinping because Russian information security is so poor. So what he's saying is that Chinese information security is so good. Basically, we know nobody's talking to him because we don't know anything. A little bit like
the
the
voices in
Bloomberg
his head.
report, right?
He's alleging, he's now alleging that Xi Jinping is a paranoid schizophrenic, I think, or at least a schizophrenic. The voices in his head.
This reminds me of the Bloomberg report where they said, oh, we went to Xinjiang to talk to the CEOs of the solar panel industries, and we couldn't meet with them. So our conclusion is that if you buy solar panels made with Xinjiang polysilicon, they could be tainted with forced labor. We don't know, but here's our conclusion. How do you
They could.
conclude that nobody talks to Xi Jinping? Because we don't know.
Yeah, what we don't know
Uh,
must be not happening. Yeah, and I've heard
correct.
this. I've heard this mentioned in a couple of reports that I've seen from Langley and the Pentagon, where they say they simply have no idea what's going on inside China now at the highest echelons because there is no inside information coming out. And that's great because it does mean that these people are completely blindsided when something happens. It's going to be fun if
It
there is a
also
war.
is a double-edged sword because it allows them to go on shows like Joe Rogan's and say whatever they want to say because it's completely unsubstantiated because there's nothing to substantiate one
Yeah.
way or another.
Well,
That's the
you have to give.
danger of
Yeah, and you have to give Joe Rogan the credit there because he did ask the question, "How do you know this?"
mm,
And
yeah.
and the answer.
No,
I mean, I would have pushed on that answer, but he let that one go. But the fact is, he did ask him, "How do you know this?" And the answer was not really substantive. We know this
no.
because we don't know anything, so that must mean there's nothing to know. That's basically what he's saying.
Basically, he's saying that China's information security is so good that we are listening to crickets. That's all that's taking place.
They're
Let's move on
analyzing
because
TikTok. Go
this
on,
next one
moving
is
on.
interesting because we both work on this research and we made content about this. This is about the Politburo. So Politburo, it goes to 812. So let me bring it back in and fast forward to 812. Uh, I feel offended when I listen to this because I know. Okay, here we go. Listen.
A variety of options. And if you look at the third-party Congress that we had late last year, that's when they select the Politburo. Everyone on the Politburo now is a personal flunky. There is no one from a different faction. There is no one that has a history of being competent.
Did he say there's
There's
no one
no
has a
one.
history of being competent?
Yeah, there's no one with history of being competent in the Politburo.
That's
I
interesting,
mean,
isn't it?
excuse
Wasn't
me?
the mayor of Shanghai just elevated to the Politburo? Now, this is a really interesting one. It was either the party secretary or the mayor of Shanghai. Now, all of the people around it, all of the experts around the world were saying Shanghai screwed up with the COVID lockdowns back in, I think, September, October, August, September. That was a devastating period of time for Shanghai. And we know people who live in Shanghai who went through that. And it was a really difficult period for everybody. And it was a screw up that didn't have to happen. Had they acted better, properly, differently at the beginning, it would have been an entirely different story, as it was in many other cities. Shanghai screwed up. But now the guy who was head of the Shanghai, I think he was party secretary of Shanghai, has now been elevated to the Politburo. And everybody said the Shanghai clique is the anti-Politburo, anti-Xi Jinping clique. And now
Yes,
maybe
everybody
he's the
knows
answer.
that Shanghai is like the most liberal country, the country
It's
that
different. Yeah.
Beijing has more trouble working with.
Mm.
And no, there's no other factions, there's no other sectors, there's no opposition, there's no. He's
Mm.
just
So
named to the Politburo.
in other words,
And no, just to
he
say,
doesn't know what
in a
he's talking about.
meritocracy, in a
Mm.
meritocracy like China's, China is by definition a meritocracy. You do not perform, you do not go higher in your duties, your responsibilities, and your authority in government. That's the definition of a meritocracy. So you're talking that the Politburo, the highest level a government official could ever aspire, there's no track record of them being competent at all. Eh, eh, Peter, please.
Except that, I mean, how can he deny that in the last 50 years, China has grown exponentially faster than any other country in the world? It has the world's largest freeway systems, the world's fastest and most efficient port systems. It has the world's best infrastructure in terms of communication, transportation, education. It has 60% of the students leaving high schools, the second highest in the world. And this year will probably be higher than America and become the highest. It has the best schools in the world, the best science, the best computing. Tsinghua University has overtaken MIT in computing and in engineering as the best schools in the world. They have, both of them have 10 times more students than MIT. And if you go to MIT, half the students are Chinese anyway. So we're talking about the degree of success of a country like China. And then you say that its leadership has no competencies. Well, how
No,
did they get there?
everything that you mentioned, Jerry, everything that you mentioned is the result of incompetence.
No,
You can't
actually,
explain it, but
not what Peter says. Peter, can I read you another of his quotes?
yes.
Billions of people have been fed and educated as the American-led trade system spread across the globe. So we should thank America for China's success. That's what Peter says. There you go.
Let's move on. There's another little bit here that we're getting to the point where Joe Rogan is like, okay, so if China is going to collapse in 10 years, but this guy gives him 10 years, right? We've seen so many YouTubers and so many influencers, 29 days, 3 days. We made a video about that when we were in Guangdong, right?
That was about 4 months ago. We made a video about 29-day collapse, wasn't it?
Correct. Gordon Chang has been calling it since the year 2000. He's off by 23 years. So this guy's giving it 10 years. Let's see. So
actually, he what's the plan? He does say it's already in decline. It's already a declining power.
All right, let me bring this up to 827. Oh, sorry. Let me put it back in here.
Ooh. And what is
827? Here we go.
What is their plan?
The Chinese?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
And what is their plan?
The Chinese?
Yeah, do we have any idea of what their plan to get out of this is?
Nationalism. If you know that the economic situation is going to go to pot, then you have a couple of options. Option one is you try to cut a deal with a country that can help you out, but the only country that could do that is the United States. And the sort of strategic surrender that the Americans would require is not something that the Chinese would accept. So think about Germany in 19.
Okay, let's put it right here because there's so many things to unfold there. Number one, there's two sides to what he says. No other country can help China other than the United States. A country that is printing money out of nothing because it's supported by the US, by the oil from the Middle East. A country that has the highest debt, and it grows minute by minute to amounts that you do not. It's so hard to comprehend. A country that has tried to establish competition to cooperation organizations that China has created. China, he's basically saying that China is alone, that China is isolated. China has nobody to go to other than the US. So what is BRICS? What is the RCEP? What is, I mean, all these, what's the Belt and Road Initiative? What's all this if not sources of cooperation? They just signed a deal with Saudi Arabia to provide energy for the next, I don't know how many years. I think it's like 20 or 30 years. China doesn't need the United States as much as they think China needs them. They need them, but not to the level that they're the only option that China has. What's your take on this one? And I have another thing later.
Okay, there's a very big difference between what the US has achieved in its last 70 years and what China has achieved in its 70 years. So let's go back to the beginning of the communist era in China. 1949 is also around about the beginning of the expansion of the United States, 1946, 45, 46. And what he's saying is absolutely right. If America was the benevolent and benign country that it could have been, then China would have some trouble capitulating to Japanese style and German style of reparation, or not reparations, sorry, of reconstruction after the war. So basically what America said to Japan and to Germany after the war is, if you don't follow our paths, we're just going to destroy you. You're dead. You're finished. You're dead in the water. You're back to the Stone Age, effectively. Now, Japan did that, and then because of the nature and the spirit and the culture of the Japanese people, they then got up to the point where they were almost catching up to America until America destroyed them. Now, what they're saying here is they're not going to allow, and they've just destroyed Germany too, by the way. And I'm quite certain that was deliberate. I don't know who blew up Nord Stream. I don't know who started the Ukrainian war, but I do know that Germany is the country most likely to suffer for that. And this guy, Peter Zeihan, and I do agree on one thing. In Europe, Germany was the power. France will become the power. UK can't, might have done in the past, but not now. But France will become the next European power. Germany will take a backward step and slide backwards, and America caused that. There is no question about how America caused that. So in other words, what he's saying is, if China bends down, kowtows to America and says, come on in and help us because we can't do it ourselves, we're incompetent and we've fallen over and blah, blah, blah. America comes in, you will then get the Japanese style of asset stripping, the German style of asset stripping, that both countries have rebuilt, but not without America profiting very handsomely from that rebuilding process. Now they talk about the Marshall Plan and stuff like that, but it's effectively America did not
the sovereignty. Taking away the
America.
sovereignty.
America doesn't give you anything for free. It sells you. It leases you. It took the United Kingdom, Great Britain. It took them till I think it was 2006 to pay off the 1945 debt. Or it might have been 2001, but certainly it was half a century for them to pay off a debt that America had forced UK to incur because of fighting fascism and the wars. So this is what America does. There's no way China is going to succumb to that, but there's no way China's going to need to for a start. But even if they did need to, I think China and Chinese people would much rather close the doors and go back to the Qing dynasty style of poverty and start again on their own. I think that's what most people would prefer to do, rather than become a vassal of America.
I want to replay that part because that must hurt so much to hear if you're a Chinese national. Listen to this bit one more time.
A deal with a country that can help you out, but the only country that could do that is the United States. And the sort of strategic surrender that the Americans would require is.
What are China's options?
In his mind, China's options are die.
Surrender to America.
Well, no, he's not even saying that. His option is the only country that could help China is America, and America won't unless China kowtows down, and China won't do that. So in other words, China is going to collapse, and it's because they
don't surrender.
Because they don't surrender their sovereignty, they don't surrender their assets, they don't surrender their facilities, their utilities, they don't surrender their minerals and whatever else they've got. They don't surrender any of it to American hegemony.
Please remember that Joe Rogan has tens of millions of followers, that this video has been viewed millions of times. This kind of language, like China will collapse because they do not surrender to America. So, I mean, the subtleties of language are not, they really get me riled up, but I've been very calm today. Let's continue with the last part, the last thing that he says. And it's like, what are you talking about? And there's so much evidence about the health part. Yeah. So let me fast forward to
this is really interesting.
11:30.
He's never been to China, has he?
No, he's never been to China. He's never been to China. So listen to this part.
And their overall health
is worse than ours. Diabetes as a percentage of the population is higher. They don't have a critical care system like we have. And their hospitals are really their only line of defense. They don't have a clinic and a doctor system in the towns like we do.
So,
yeah, okay. Which
country's lifespan has been the lowest in the last 25 years. The
Yeah,
opposite is true for China. America's
America just
lifespan
went down.
has been the lowest in
Not
25
the lowest.
years.
America has the lowest in the OECD now.
Mm.
It has gone down in the last 3 years through COVID, of course. It's gone down by more than 2 years. And of course, it will continue to go down because COVID deaths are still happening. He is correct in one aspect of this. He doesn't understand the cultural side of it, but he's correct in one aspect of it. China does not have a system of high street clinicians. You can't go to your GP's office. You don't have very many smaller clinics. There are smaller clinics. There are fever clinics, and the
Yes.
fever clinics are quite new. This is a new thing in the last 2 years, of course. But Chinese people traditionally, when they're ill, they do one of two things. They go to the pharmacy where you can buy almost any medicine you need off the shelf. We can buy penicillin, we can buy all kinds of different things off the shelf. You can go in there, you can buy your, if you're an asthmatic, you can buy asthmatic puffers, you can buy insulin off the shelf, you can buy pretty much anything you need from your pharmacy, so you don't need to go to your doctor to get that. If you need to get sick, if you are sick and you need to see a doctor, then in China, the culture is that people take themselves to the hospital. And the tradition, the way that medicine is dealt with, and you have seen this, is a drip into the hand. So they don't give you penicillin and send you home. They'll give you a drip into the hand. 40 minutes later, you're usually out of the hospital and usually feeling better. It's only happened to me twice. And I've been to hospital a few times. I broke my wrist, had x-rays, stuff like that. It cost me next to nothing. It was like 12 quid, 12 pounds in English money, $20 to have an x-ray and then a plaster put onto my broken wrist. I went back a couple of weeks later, had an MRI scan, and the whole thing cost me less than 25 pounds. Everything.
Well, I've had a few
why...
surgeries in my hand, and
yes, you have, yeah.
It cost me $100. The whole thing, with medicine, with
surgery.
X-rays, with tests, a surgery, $100.
Yeah. I know. So, right. So people do. He's right in that respect, but in terms of diabetes, I don't think diabetes is a big problem. He alluded to obesity as well, because apparently Chinese people don't have nutritional information. I tell you what, the one thing I notice when I leave China is how thin Chinese people are. I'm nearly 100 kilos. I'm a big fat guy in China. I go here. I mean, I know 12-year-olds who are heavier than me in Australia. I mean, this is a serious problem. If you look at the obesity rates, the diabetes rates, China doesn't even figure in the top 50 countries. I mean, I'm not sure what the figures are, but I'm sure it's not in the top 50 countries. There is hardly any obesity here. There's hardly any nutritional issue, health problems. But there are in the elderly, people who have the rickets, the bent over back from having poor nutrition through the previous years. None of that happens now. I mean, everybody gets square meals. Everybody eats meat. Everybody eats what they want to eat, and they can all afford it. And that's the amazing thing. Nobody can not afford it.
I want to finish up. I want to finish up with this man is full of contradictions, but this is one that, again, it makes you wonder, why are you listening to these people? Why are you listening to individuals that within the span of a 12, 13 minute video, they contradict themselves? I want to bring you back to minute 112. So let me bring you back to minute 112 and listen to what he says here.
Because the Americans are no longer patrolling the global oceans anymore.
Sorry, let me go back and restart my camera. I'm going to change my camera.
So he said there that the Americans are no longer patrolling the global oceans. I don't think he's been to the South China Sea recently, which has, last time I counted, was 74 ships led by the Americans, including 2 aircraft carriers. So I don't think he's got that right. But America, what he said was America are no longer patrolling the global oceans.
And
Yes,
security
listen.
infrastructure because the Americans are no longer patrolling the global oceans anymore.
So the Americans are not patrolling the global oceans, right? But now let's go to 4:30 and listen to what he says at 4:30.
Completely dependent on the U.S. Navy to access international trade.
The Chinese depend on the Navy to access
I love that.
international trade. Listen.
Yeah.
They don't have the young people to go consumption-led. They're completely dependent on the U.S. Navy to access international trade.
So the U.S. Navy doesn't patrol the oceans anymore. But at the same time, China is depending on the U.S. Navy for international trade. How is that possible when China has some of the most developed? Think about the Belt and Road Initiative. Most most of the investment that has been put into the Belt and Road Initiative is land-based, is
Yes, a
train
lot of train
systems.
train systems going across to, they're building one into
There are
Pakistan, they're into Kazakhstan. You can get a train direct, you can put freight on a train in Foshan, in Nansha in Guangzhou, and 13 days later it's dropped off in Poland. So you're going to you're going from the South China Sea all the way across to the Baltic Sea by train. I don't think the patrolling of the Chinese Navy the U.S. Navy is going to help that very much. That's a big problem for him.
Again, not only is he wrong, but at the same time, he's contradicting himself within 3 minutes of this video.
Well, he's wrong both times because China are still patrolling the global oceans. That's one thing. So he's wrong there. Secondly, China's trade is not China's trade is not dependent on. In fact, it's completely the opposite. China's trade would do very well without the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy is in the South China Sea, so it can, if it needs to, blockade China, which is why China has gone overland. That's the reason China is doing business overland. It now can send stuff to ships in the Baltic, and then they can go to South America or Africa or wherever they need to go. So this is, I mean, he's not only wrong, he's contradicting himself. And he's wrong on both contradictions, but nobody seems to notice that.
Yeah, that's the thing with this kind of interviews where people just sit there and absorb whatever these people come and say, and they're pulling things out of their hats. So we've shown you 12 points of this clip of this video that if you look at them from an analytical perspective, if you put your thinking hat and look at it bit by bit, this person is a charlatan. That's all he is. And at the beginning of this video, Jerry said it so clearly. One-child policy had nothing to do with Mao Zedong, but that's what he claimed at minute 120, I think. So there you go. That's what we wanted to share with you, Jerry. Any final thoughts on this particular? You said you wanted to mention something about COVID because he does talk about COVID, even though I don't have that part right here.
He does talk about COVID. Now, hang on. Let me just go back to my source. And what did I say about the COVID thing?
He says that there are issues with several variants that are in China.
Oh, that was the thing. He said there were 7 variants in China. I think one of the variants is called number 7, but there are not 7 variants in China. There are 2. What China has done, and he talked about the issues of China's problems opening up, and I believe this is why this was important. There is currently a narrative coming out of the United States, and Joe Rogan is now part of that, that is supporting an American approach to something that is going to happen. Now, the XBB variant is the one that's going around the world at the moment, and it is in China, but only in quarantine. I'm a little nervous about this one because some reports say XBB variant is much stronger than the others. it does appear to be more easily caught. That's one thing. I don't know how anything can be more easily caught than what happened to us a few weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. We went from on the 7th of December, knowing no one who had caught COVID, to on about the 15th of December, knowing virtually no one who hadn't caught COVID. And I think you are the only person, you and Bess are the only people I know who have not had COVID. And that's because you've isolated yourself in your RV and run away from from communicating with the world. Every single person, every person I know caught COVID, and we're all better. All of us, everyone. I mean, I've got former students that I meet for coffees and stuff, and I had one girl cancel a meeting. She said, "I can't come. I've got COVID." She said, "Every single person in my class has got COVID, and there's 60 people." A week later, she said, "Everyone's back at school, and we're all well again." In her class, there are 10,000 students. More than half the 10,000 students caught COVID, and they all got better. So this is not the killer that it once was. We now know that for a fact. That doesn't mean it's not going to kill people. It will still kill people, and there's no doubt about that. He went on to say 1.5 million people are going to die. We shall see if that's true. I don't think it is, but we shall see. No one knows. So I'm not going to say he's wrong about that, because we'll know in a few weeks' time, or a few months anyway, whether or not he's right about that. I don't think he will be. I suspect he's wrong, but he's wrong about everything else. Why should he be right about a prediction? Then here's the thing. Here's the big thing. There are variants around the world. They are now, America are now being very quiet and suppressing information about variants, and they're being very loud about the potential variants that could come from China. If a variant comes out, it's going to be the Wuhan virus again. It's going to be, look what China did. We got the world sorted out. We got the world vaccinated, which is not true. China did 2.2 billion vaccinations overseas. America is still saying they're going to send vaccines, and they've only sent a few of the promised vaccines to COVAX, the World Health Organization vaccination program. So they're not doing what they said they were going to do. They're now being very low-key about future variants. And I believe that the reason that this guy mentioned it on the Joe Rogan show was so that they can say in the future, "We told you so. It comes from China, the same way the Wuhan virus came from China, the same way China allowed it to go around the world." And that's going to be the next narrative if there is a further variant that becomes more virulent, more pathogenic, more dangerous. When that happens, they're going to say it's China's fault again. Now, it wasn't China's fault in the first place. I think that's fairly clear. But they're going to blame China once again. And that's why I think this Joe Rogan show is now, I believe that I did believe he was independent, and he was, kind of anti-establishment. But on this, he's following the establishment line. They're mentioning the variant just so they can go forward with this at a later time. That's how I see it.
Well, friends, we want to thank you all for your attention, but we're going to leave you with one little gem. This is the thing that I told you at the beginning of the show, Jerry.
Right.
It's important to know that the voices that are attacking China constantly, they're just doing it without any kind of care, any kind of attention to detail. So watch this particular post from a let me see if I can put it here, the Xinjiang Victims Database. It's important to remember that the Xinjiang Victims Database was cited several times and quoted several times in the United Nations Human Rights Report that was published last year. This is
and the Uyghur Tribunal.
And the Uyghur Tribunal as well.
They provide, and it was the Xinjiang Victims Database that were able to say we've only got 600 names. I think whatever the number was, is a very low number. These thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people who are locked up, but we've only got 600 names. I think it's 2,600 names.
And it's also the Xinjiang Victims Database that QC Nice actually told them, like, look, you can revise your numbers in September. because they
Yes.
contradict themselves. But here's the latest, and you got to remember also that Xinjiang Victims Database is supported, it's amplified by ASPI as well, ASPI. Now,
Yeah, in
this is what
Australia,
they
and the National Endowment for Democracy.
mhm. This is
Mm.
what they published just the other day. Let me show you 1 second. It said that they added 2,000 Urumqi police officers to their accountability database. And the interesting thing is that one of those, it's well,
I
Andy
recognize that
Lau.
face. Oh my God!
This,
Every Chinese person looking at this now is going, "He's a policeman in Xinjiang."
well, he's a policeman in movies in Hong Kong all the time. He
Yes, he
plays that.
was. Yeah, he's a
And
good singer
there's
too. His
other
name is. You're going to say his name. Everybody in the world knows his name, but only Chinese
Andy
people
Lau.
would immediately go, "That's Andy Lau." Yes.
Uh-huh. There's another Hong Kong star that's ended up in the picture here. There's caricatures, and these are the people that we're supposed to take seriously when they
Yeah.
just launch accusations on China and Xinjiang. Please. So yes, that's the last thing that I wanted to show you,
Mm.
friends. Jerry, it's been a pleasure. I know that I got
Always.
you very, very busy, but you
Yeah, been
found
a
the time
busy
to do it, and
period.
I appreciate that.
No, it's a lot
All
of fun
right.
doing this. When you showed me that thing, we have to do this. We've got to do this. This is just
Yes,
it's
within
too
the first
important to
seconds, you're
let it
like,
go.
my God.
Well, it literally took me 34 seconds to say nah. That was my first 34 seconds is nah.
Xi
And that
Jinping
wasn't the full
shoots people that
interview.
he doesn't like.
That was the full interview is on some behind a paywall. This is only the preview, the 14-minute preview.
Mhm.
You want to have the full
God
interview,
knows
you've got
what
to
else he
pay for
said.
it. Oh, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Maybe he said maybe the rest of it was all true.
Who knows? But this
Who
14
knows?
minutes, oh my God. Uh, all
I'm
right.
trying to be generous here. Okay. Thank you very much,
Well,
Fernando, for the invite onto the Wu Mao show. It's been the first one in a couple of months because we've all had a
yes,
busy
indeed.
period.
Let's do some
Yeah, we
more.
yeah, we
All
should.
right,
We
friends, you
should. And
know what
thanks
to do.
everybody
Like,
for watching.
comment, share. Subscribe to Jerry, follow him on Twitter, and well, until we see you again, take it